All right. All right. Good evening. My name is Benjamin. I'm going to be your instructor for today with Nitrox. Nitrox is a fantastic class to teach as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay with you guys. Let's see. As always, if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to unmute yourself and come into the meeting and join in. Give me a thumbs up when you see my screen. Just let me know that you can see it. Fantastic. All right. Got 3 thumbs up. So we are rocking, socking robots today. All right. Again, my name is Benjamin. I'm a Nitrox instructor. My qualifications to teach this are I'm a dive master instructor, which I can teach through Dive Master. And that's what Aaron is joining us for today because he is learning to be a dive master of the dives. I'm also an Enriched Air Nitrox instructor. Which means that what we're teaching tonight, and I'm also an extended range nitrox, which means I'm capable of teaching up to 100% nitrox. What that means to you is nitrox we're going to be learning tonight is going to be level 1 and level 2. Level 3 and level 4 are going to be beyond you because that's going to be up to 50% and up to 100%. But know that you are able to learn and take those courses up to that point. All right. If you just be aware that some of the fun things that I can teach are all the way through. I teach ice diving, dry suit, independent solo rec, advanced rec, wave size and currents as well. So there's definitely a whole adventure out there of diving to be aware of. The companion to this class, to be able to pass this class or to be able to pass stress and rescue, but the good companion to this class is React Right. Deep diving, night and limited viz as well. And then I think some of you signed up for stress and rescue at the end of this month as well. At least Josh is. I don't know if you are, James, but if you haven't thought about it, it's definitely an amazing course to take. And I think Aaron has a little experience with that course as he's sucking down his water there at sea. Aaron, you want to tell us a little bit about what you think about stress and rescue?
I would say it's probably, in my mind, one of the most important classes you'll ever take as a diver once you get your open water, because you learn to manage your own stress, your own rescue, as well as helping other people.
Absolutely. What was your experience? Now, have you been only through my stress rescue class, or have you been through some other instructor stress rescue classes as well?
I've been, I did it right after I got open water certified, and then when Bill Brown was there, I think we taught it with search and rescue about once a year. So probably about 15 times through it, but you still learn something else or think of something else every time you take it. So
awesome. So Aaron's got a lot of experience with that as well. What do you think of the stress and rescue class that I teach? How did that go?
I think it was really good. Yeah. Like I said, every instructor has a little bit of something they put into it. And yours is definitely a little deeper into some of the things than other people teach it. So
excellent. So there's your reason for stress and rescue. Past that, I encourage deep diving and night and limited viz. Between this course, deep diving, night and limited viz, that'll cover all the diving that you'd ever want to probably do, unless you really want to go crazy and do things like get deeper and longer, and then you start heading towards tech. But to get to there, you have to go through these courses to get there. So those are your quick things. The purpose of nitrox. And so the question always becomes, do you want to dive deeper? Do you want to dive longer? Do you want to have less surface interval? More energy after the dives? Now, one of those statements is not true. Which statement of that, James, do you think is not true?
Diving deeper.
Somebody did their homework. I'm very impressed. Good job. Deeper is absolutely it. With nitrox, we definitely add some limiting factors, but the good news is if you do the deep diving certification that takes you 130 feet, you do want to use nitrox on those deep dives. But for the rest of it is absolutely true. If having more energy after a dive sounds good to you, having less surface interval and more bottom time sounds good to you, then nitrox is for you. So that's the benefit for you guys. We're going to be covering a few key pieces today. We're going to be covering the partial pressures, what that means to you. We're going to talk about how that increases as we go into depth, what the limiting partial pressures are. We're also going to talk about hypoxia and anoxia as well, and how that works out to you. The benefits of using less nitrogen in your mix. We'll go through some laws. The laws are boring. I'll be the first to admit that. We'll talk about Henry. We'll talk about Dalton, and what they mean to you, and we'll go through the whys. We'll talk about my very favorite, nitrogen narcosis, and what that looks like to you and how to avoid that. Overall, we'll talk about the effects of oxygen on the diver, and how you need to be aware of that. We'll go through some CNS, central nervous system, oxygen toxicity. By the way, I'm former military, so I am big on my acronyms. If I spit out an acronym, please call me on it and don't let me get away with it, because especially if you don't understand it, because it doesn't do either of us any good. Yes, I know the material, but if you don't understand that acronym, please call me out, raise your hand, say, hey, you can't do that. You have to explain it first, and I will absolutely explain it to you to make sure we understand. So CNS is oxygen central nervous system toxicity. We'll talk about what that kind of looks like, the benefits of that. There are no benefits, by the way. We'll talk about what the symptoms, signs, and symptoms. We'll have some test questions on that. We'll also go through some deco theory as well, just to give you an idea of how that works in inert gas absorption and elimination. We're going to talk about the same stuff again, just like we did in open water. We'll go through the dive tables, and we're going to talk about dive computers, their benefits, and why you too should have your own dive computer. Flying after diving, and then finally we'll kind of end the night with how do you analyze your cylinder, the effects of nitrox use and impacts on the diving, as well as using it with standard SCUBA equipment. So that's what we're going to cover. I happen to cheat here, I'll be honest with you, and I have a deck. So we'll go through that piece by piece. So, Josh, what do you think enriched air nitrox is? What is nitrox?
An air mixture over 21% air.
21% is the magic number. So let's talk about what is the composition of the air we're currently breathing. James, I'm sorry. James, what are we currently breathing right now?
Nitrogen and oxygen.
Absolutely. So here's the thing to be aware of is technically everything is nitrox. If you really want to put a fine point on it, it's all a nitrogen oxygen blend. But for the purposes of what we're doing today and what we're talking about, nitrox really becomes any blend of oxygen that's more than 21%. So that's important to kind of know, because you can certainly do blends of gas that have less than 79% nitrogen, but still retain that 21% oxygen. Okay. And there's a couple different blends. The most common blend out there that you'll hear about is something called trimix, and that's when we start mixing in helium. There are some cool experiments going on right now with hydrogen as well. But the problem is with hydrogen, if you mix it with more than 4% oxygen, it becomes a very, very, very flammable and even explosive. And that's just not a good thing. We're going to be certifying you guys tonight for nitrox level 1 and level 2, provided I can say it. That's going to be the key, is if I can say it, you'll be able to get certified in it. So nitrox level 1, Josh, what is nitrox level 1? How much oxygen is that?
32.
32. And nitrox level 2?
40.
40%. Now, in this nitrox class, it's super important for you to remember 40%. There is going to be later on, and if you've already read your homework, there's a 40% rule. And we'll go through what that 40% rule is later on. So overall, the advantages of nitrox, we talked about that at the beginning. With nitrox, you're breathing a lower percentage of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the limiting factor for most dives, because the more nitrogen you obtain, the more nitrogen you have to off gas. So what comes in goes out, equal and opposite, right? So if it comes in, or not so much that, but what goes up must come down is our theory process here for this one. So same thing with this is, as we uptake nitrogen at a higher partial pressure, we have to off gas nitrogen at a partial pressure as well. So with that, we're breathing a lower partial pressure of nitrogen, which gives us ability to do an equivalent depth at the same time as well. So we're able to go deeper, but it's equivalent to a shallower depth. So the limiting factor in diving is the nitrox, really, is the nitrogen. So as we get too high a percentage of nitrogen, then other things have to come into play, longer safety stops, more ascent time, and even into deco. So as we go into less nitrogen, we're able to go deeper, but it equivalent in our body to a shallower depth. So what are some of the limitations of nitrox? James, what do you think? What's a key limitation for nitrox?
Partial pressure of oxygen.
Absolutely. Partial pressure of oxygen is now why? Why would a high partial pressure of oxygen be of concern?
Too much buildup and you start getting into CNS and oxygen toxicity.
Absolutely. Oxygen toxicity is the exact right word. So good job on that. As we go through this, I will question you guys often to see where you're at. And if I feel like you've got a better handle on it than what my presentation expresses, then I may skip ahead a little bit as well. So I want to make sure you guys have a good understanding. And if I do go too fast or I do skip something you want to go over, please just stop me and we'll go back to it. So let's look at that for a minute. The concept of partial pressure is pretty straightforward. We have a specific size of an atom, right? And at 1 bar, this molecule or atom of air, if you will, at EAN 21, what we're breathing, is equal to 79%, 21%. Now, if we go to 2 bar, which is how deep, James?
Anything over 33 feet.
Well, not so much over, but it would be 33 feet seawater, 34 feet freshwater. And the reason being is seawater is a little heavier. So we're going to do everything in seawater, if you don't mind, because it's an easy calculation and it's the one most people think about. So we'll stick with that, if you don't mind. We can certainly talk in freshwater as well, but for argument's sake, just it makes it easier and it's not that hard a calculation. But overall, if we get down to that 33 feet seawater at 2 bar, we now compressed everything in to literally 50% of what it was before. And so if we get to that 55%, now we're, or 50% compression, now we have the same molecule holds the equivalent of 158% or 1.58 partial pressure of nitrogen and 0.42 partial pressure of oxygen, or the equivalent of 42% oxygen, this occupying the same space. Now, here's the benefit of nitrox is EAN 32, which is a very common blend. You'll find that 32, 36, and 40 are the most common blends you'll find. You'll find some shops that bank 36. Most of them will bank either bank 32. You can order custom blends at some shops, and they call it best blend. And we'll go through how to get a best blend later on. But if we're doing that same dive, and we start at the surface at 32%, we're at 68% nitrogen, 32% oxygen. As we get down to that 2 bar, literally doubling everything, the double pressure, we get down to equivalent of a 64% oxygen and 136% nitrogen, or 1.36 partial pressure of nitrogen. So as you can see really quickly, same depth, a lot less nitrogen. And we start looking at that less nitrogen, that becomes a big key factor. I mean, 18% less nitrogen. So if you were to use just an air table and dive nitrox on an air table, you build in an automatic 18% safety margin right there, which is one of the things you can do. Some people will dive an oxygen table or an air table on a nitrox tank. Now, there's a few things to be aware of on that, but they're not as big a stress factor as a lot of people will lead you to believe. So the partial pressure of oxygen, based upon the depth and the fractional partial pressure of oxygen. And how do we calculate that? And what are our limiting factors? Well, here's our partial pressures. So we start off with right here in the middle, 21% or 0.21 is the normal partial pressure of the air that we're currently breathing. Now, if we start going down from there, we go down to 16%. So say we go to 16,000 feet, that's going to be about 16% oxygen at that level. We're going to go to a threshold where hypoxia starts to happen. Exercises and tolerance, mental performance diminishes below this level. So you're not able to think as well. Your brain is not getting enough oxygen. And we certainly talked to enough people at the grocery store where we're pretty sure that their brain's not getting enough oxygen for the comments and stupid things that they're doing. But at high altitude, that's actually a thing where you start getting to the point where your brain is going hypoxic. Another common time where your brain starts going hypoxic. Anybody ever do sprints in high school? You do that 100-yard sprint and you just do it over and over and over and over again. You're going into, if you have, that's when your body's going into a hypoxic environment. And as you remember, if you've done 3 or 4 or 5 sets of sprints in a row where you're hardcore everything out, you're not exactly a rocket scientist at the end of that, right? You have a lot of mental capacity diminishes at that point. You're certainly not, going straight from the track and doing 10 hardcore 200-yard sprints in a row to your physics class and expecting it to pass. The brain needs oxygen to be able to function. If we go down to 0.12 or 12% oxygen, that's a minimum amount required to maintain consciousness. Now, this is approximate, by the way. Remember we talked about in class overall that how you, James, process nitrogen in your system versus how I process versus Josh versus Aaron processes nitrogen and oxygen is all very different. I mean, we have those superheroes out there like Tenzing Norgay who led Sir Walter Hillary up Mount Everest. Now, this was just another day in the life for Tenzing. He's been up and down this Sherpa and this freaking cliff his whole life since he was a little kid. So no big deal. Tenzing Norgay, Sir Walter Hillary, this was his first time up, and he got there, and he certainly had quite a few things to say about being at the top of Everest and how that really affected his body. So the difference between Tenzing Norgay and Sir Walter Hillary was definitely a lot different. They processed oxygen a lot differently and handled it much differently. You and I, as we process this idea, it's not going to be the same. Now, this is a number to remember: 0.10. 10% is required minimum to be able to sustain life. And that is a test question, by the way, overall. So we need at least a 10% oxygen mix at the surface or at any given time to be able to sustain life. Anything below that, we start having big problems. Now, as we go up the oxygen scale, as it starts getting to a higher partial pressure, remember we talked about a moment ago, as we got to that 1 atmosphere, at 32%, we were at 64% oxygen, right? So it's not going to take very long at that rate for that number to start getting over 100%. And as it gets over 100% at going deeper, at 1.1, that's a threshold. That is our basic threshold for oxygen toxicity symptoms where they can start occurring. At 1.4, now these are 3 numbers you're also going to remember because they're in the test somewhere. At 1.4 is the partial pressure level at which oxygen presents a moderate risk, and it's recommended that this be the working limit for recreational divers. That's important. Now, at 1.6 is the level at which oxygen presents the most substantial risk for divers, and it's the absolute partial pressure limit for recreational divers, period. So if, for example, James and Josh, I take you guys out. We're going to go dive the Lady Luck, right? What we'll do is we'll build up a blend to hit the deck that we don't go over 1.4. But I can tell you there's some cool things off the edge of that boat that are pretty cool at the sand. So if we're at 0.14 or 1.4 at the deck, we're going to be 1.6 if we hit the sand. Now, we can go see that, but we don't want to stay there for very long. It's the maximum pressure that we want to ever go to. And we want to make sure we're staying below that. But we can certainly go to it for short periods of time. You can also use that for a decompression blend. But the problem is you're off-gassing very quickly, and it becomes a definite way to wear yourself out. You'll get to the surface after a long deco on 1.6, and you'll be wore out like you would not believe. All right. So the benefits of breathing less nitrogen, nitrox use and bottom time. So with nitrox, you get more bottom time because you're not absorbing nitrogen as quickly. Another thing nitrox is great for is that it reduces nitrogen narcosis. Now, we talked about a little bit in dive class. Thought I was going to sneeze. Sorry. That at a certain point, past 60 feet, nitrogen narcosis becomes a concern. After 100 feet, every 30 feet that you go after 100 feet, nitrogen narcosis presents at least equivalent to a large martini on an empty stomach for every 30 feet. So at 160 feet, which you're not certified to do, but on pure air would be the equivalent of drinking 3 martinis on an empty stomach. Now, on some of us, now for myself, I don't drink. I used to, but I don't any longer. So I can tell you if I were to drink now, it'd be a pretty sloppy drunk, cheap drunk, right? It wouldn't take a whole lot. My tolerance to liquor is very, very low. I don't practice it. I don't drink it. So 1 martini on me, and I'd be a little goofy. I have a son-in-law that's an excellent drinker. He can drink a 6-pack and walk a straight line. Not a big deal at all. He's got a very high tolerance, but he's practiced it as well. So it's one of the reasons we say in going deep and getting this is we want to give you experience doing that. And one of the ways to get experience on that is to take the deep dive course. So we'll get you the understanding of how to recognize those signs and symptoms of nitrogen narcosis in yourself. As we all know, it's because, especially since we're all guys here, most of us, I can tell you all day long what it feels like, what it looks like, what the dangers of it are. But until you go get a little narked or go get a little drunk or take that first puff on a cigarette, you don't believe it's bad for you, right? It just is what it is. So nitrogen narcosis, with less nitrogen in the mix, you'll have less chance of nitrogen narcosis. Now, nitrogen nitrox use and decompression sickness. The good thing is that the limiting factor for most dives is the amount of nitrogen. So if you're taking less nitrogen in, you have a lot less chance of getting decompression sickness. Decompression sickness comes from the nitrogen coming out of our fast and slow tissues into the bloodstream and creating bubbles. Now, the sacrifice of the nitrox safety margin. So there is a large contingent of people out there that believe firmly that you can run an air table on a nitrox blend. Now, the good news on doing that is this, is that by doing that, you increase your safety margin considerably. So with a 32% nitrox blend at 60 feet, you'd be able to stay down for 80 minutes. On an air table, you can always stay down for 60 minutes, for example. So if you're running the air table, you're staying down you can stay down for that 60 minutes. But on nitrox, truthfully, you've got another 20 minutes, giving you an additional 20 minute safety margin. Same thing with depth. So overall, you can sacrifice a lot of things, a lot of the benefits of nitrox, and increase your safety margin by running an air table versus a standard nitrox table. Now, for me, I don't like doing that. But here's why, is there's another side of breathing pure oxygen, and that's the oxygen toxicity that James, you'd mentioned earlier, that we have to be aware of. And so I want to know exactly where I am on the oxygen toxicity scale. So Josh, after all this information I've given you, is rich or better?
I think it depends.
Okay, give me it depends.
Well, it depends on, what depth you're going to, what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, situational, right? Trying to figure out what do I want to do with this dive. So Josh, I want to do a 150-foot dive. Is nitrox right for me?
Maybe a leaner one.
Possibly. And we'll go through the math on that a little bit. That's kind of a trick question because we haven't really gone through that information yet. But I was just curious where your knowledge point was on that. So what do you think, James? Is 150-foot dive nitrox right for me?
No, because once you go over 100 feet, you're hitting that 3 atmospheres of partial pressure. So if you're looking at 32 blend, you're going to be putting yourself at a little over 110 for it. So you're pushing the limits of what your 32 would do.
Yep, absolutely. So you're going to definitely rock yourself out on partial pressure. All right, you guys ready for the boring laws? Let's knock this out quickly. Henry's Law. Henry's Law is actually extremely important. It has a lot of far-reaching implications, especially when you start getting into cold as well. So Henry's Law basically states the amount of gas that will dissolve in a liquid is directly proportionate to the partial pressure of that gas, given that the temperature and the molecular movement agitation of the liquid are constant. It was formulated by an English chemist, William Henry, back in the 19th century, a long time ago. So an understanding of Henry's Law is important when considering diver physiology and hyperbaric environment. The greater the volume dissolved of a particular gas or gases may have varied physiological effects on the diver at increased partial pressures. And the supersaturation of that gas, I don't know about you guys, but I'm already falling asleep on reading his detailed information. Here's what Henry's basically saying. You read some of these laws and I get it. They're cool. They're neat. God, couldn't they be a little more Red Bull? Come on, guys. They're just a little boring. So Henry's basically saying that as the gas is dissolved with agitation and movement at a constant temperature, that partial pressure will dissolve into the liquid of the bloodstream and goes out to the extremities, out into your fast and slow tissues. And we'll say that term quite a few times, and I'll explain a little detail later on. Now, here's one interesting caveat that as you read into Henry's law, that as the molecular temperature gets colder, it dissolves faster. So the partial pressure of oxygen air, what you're breathing, the gas that you're breathing, is dependent upon the agitation and the temperature, and it will dissolve into the bloodstream or the blood based upon the temperature, how much your heart is beating, as well. So just understand that that's what Henry's law is trying to tell you. Dalton's law is just about as boring. It's the law of partial pressures. The partial pressure gas number 1 plus the partial pressure of gas number 2 equals the total pressure. And I basically tell Dalton, really? No, duh, really? So if I add 1 and 1, it really adds up to 2 every single time? If I add up all the crayons in a box, that I'll get the total? Huh. Okay, well, I get that. That's basically what he's saying, but he goes a little deeper into that. So Dalton's law really comes out to, it's the basic law to understand what the nitrox calculation is. You are welcome to write this out. If you do, you're farther along than because I wouldn't write it down because it's that boring. Let's get into what it really is trying to tell you, though. So Dalton's law really is the law of partial pressures. So in this particular case, the partial pressure of oxygen is 21%. The partial pressure of nitrogen is 79%. At 33 feet seawater, seawater, it's 2 atmospheres. So 2 atmospheres at times 0.21, 21% equals 42%. Easy enough. 2 atmospheres equals 33 feet seawater. So what we're trying to tell you with this is simply that the partial pressure of oxygen at 2 atmospheres is going to be 42%. At 3 atmospheres, it's going to be 63%, and that's 66 feet. Nitrogen, 2 atmospheres is going to be 79. 2 atmospheres times 79 is 1.58 or 158%. That's simply how you figure it out. If you know what the depth that you're going to be at is, you can figure out the atmospheres. So if I'm at 99 feet, that's 3. 3 atmospheres plus 1 for the surface makes 4. So we always have to make sure we're adding in the surface tension as well. So that's why 2 atmospheres is 33 feet. We add in the surface plus the 1 atmosphere. 1 plus 1 is 2. If we're at 66 feet, that's 2 atmospheres down plus the surface makes 3. And you can keep going. At 99 feet, that's 3 atmospheres plus 1 equals 4. So if we're at 44 feet or 99 feet, that's 4 total atmospheres. 4 times 0.21 means we're at 84% oxygen. So safety note, oxygen becomes toxic at 1.6. So the working load for oxygen for safety is 1.4. Here's the other side of that we don't talk about, and that's not in the book. Nitrogen begins to become narcotic at 2.37 or 237%. Nitrogen becomes unsafe at 395%. The nitrogen will be equal to 1 martini on an empty stomach at 100 feet and will increase exponentially, not linearly from there. And what that means to you is at 133 feet, 1 martini. At 166 feet, 3 martinis. So it becomes substantially more. And on some people, they gain in nitrogen narcotic effect a lot faster than others. So let's look at Dalton's law practical application for best mix. How do I figure out what the best mix for the gas that I'm going to be breathing? I want to dive the Lady Luck. Here's an example. The depth for our formulations today is going to be 33 feet for every atmosphere. 1.4 is the working load atmosphere for actual ATA for best mix. So an imperial example looks like this. If a diver wishes to make a dive to 115 feet, What is the best mixture for that dive? Here's how we do that. 115 foot of depth divided by 33 feet seawater equals 3.48. Simple enough so far. You guys got me? We're not talking hardcore geometry here yet, right? And I hate geometry. I like physics and calculus. But anyway, so 115 divided by 33 equals 3.48. Why are we adding back the 1? That's the surface tension, right? We have to add back in our surface, which equals a total atmospheric pressure of 4.48. So if we dive 115 feet, that's equal to 4.48 atmospheres. Now, simple enough, we're going to take that 1.4, which is our total working load of partial pressure of oxygen. We're going to divide that by our new atmospheres. So 1.4 divided by 4.48 equals 31%. Does that make sense, or is that clear as mud? Who gets it? Right on, Josh. Figured Josh has probably already got this all done and figured out all the calculations and checked my best gas mix thing over here, right? Mr. Software.
I don't do good math in my head. I can do it on a calculator, but
You've got it. I know you've written an app for this already and get ready to send it over to us, I'm sure. So overall, so let's check our math. We said we wanted to go to 115 feet. 115 feet by the SSI chart says 31% blend. Good news, guys. I want you to be able to figure this out mathematically with a calculator or a pad and paper. Most times, probably 75% of all my dives, I've either had access to a chart or there's been a chart handy at the dive site or at the dive shop where I picked up my tanks. So I've been able to go back to this chart. Right in your handy dandy little My SSI app that's on your phone, this chart is available to you. But knowing how to do the math is definitely to your advantage, especially if you're getting ready to do a dive and you say, hey, I want to dive the Lady Luck, and the Lady Luck is 115 feet to the deck. It's 135 feet to the sand. So what does that look like? So you're able to figure that out. So in this particular case, when we dove the Lady Luck, our best blend, we dove 31%. And that was the best blend for us on that. Now, question for you, Aaron. I'll ask Aaron today. We'll pick on Aaron. How will this affect your nitrogen exposure if I'm diving a 31% blend?
I'll be at 3.09 or 309%.
Absolutely. But how will that affect your nitrogen exposure? What's that going to do for you? Anything good? Anything bad?
Very bad.
Bad?
You're 4.5 times the normal nitrogen load.
But what if you were diving at 21% IR at 115 feet?
Well, that'd be worse. But
So this would be better than diving normal air, right?
yeah, but you're
So,
still fairly exposed to nitrogen.
You are, absolutely. But it gives us a much lower equivalent nitrogen depth, right?
Yeah,
So
you'd be 395% without nitrox.
Absolutely. Let's see. 0.78 times 4.48. Yep, you're at 349%. So you're right there at the limit. So you're going to definitely feel some narcotic effect at this. And you're there. You don't want to be any deeper than this on your on nitrogen, because you're going to start definitely feeling some problems, right? But it's a lot better if you were diving air, say into 21 times 4.48 equals, let's see, 0.21 times 4.48. Oh, I'm sorry, 79. I'm having a brain aneurysm apparently today. Times 4.48. Golly, I can't get my calculator. 4.48.
3.53.
Yeah, it's a lot higher. So you're definitely going to get into nitrogen narcosis and feeling the effects. Now, personal experience. I was diving the Lady Luck, and we were some of the advanced divers and doing some. We were tech diving it, and there were some recreational divers that were doing this as well. Now, the fun part about being a tech diver with recreational divers on a deep dive like this is you watch them come down, they stay down for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they head back up. And then you get the next 20 to 30 minutes by yourself where you don't have to deal with the recreational divers anymore. It's wonderful. It's like watching the kids go home because it's sunset, right? So overall, we did our dive. We had fun. We played with the giant seahorse. There's a 7.5-foot seahorse at the back at the stern of this boat. It's kind of fun. There's a table with some sharks playing pool or playing cards on it. Nikki and I enjoyed it. We had a great time. We went back up to the boat and did our deco. Got on the boat. We're relaxing out, and the husband was asking the wife, "What did you think of the giant seahorse?" And she looked at him and said, "What seahorse?" And he said, the seahorse you were swimming around for 5 minutes with. She's like, "What?" "Yeah, the 7.5-foot gold seahorse." I don't remember the seahorse. So one of the things, signs and symptoms of nitrogen narcosis is loss of memory and inability to remember your dive. So yet another benefit to nitrox is that you'll also generally have a better memory of your dive, because in nitrogen narcosis, you will not remember a lot of what's going on. And with diving, that doesn't sound like a good deal. I want to remember the whole dive. But overall, that's how we figured it out. It's pretty straightforward. Simply divide the depth by the atmospheric depth. So depth divided by 33 feet equals that plus 1 divided by the partial pressure of what we're trying to attain. Simple enough, guys. If you guys would like, all you have to do is email me and I will email you this formula as well. I do not believe that this formula is in your book in nitrox. This is part of that. I told you that I will give you 20 to 30% that you cannot find in the book. If you find something on one of my slides that you need a copy of, just let me know and I'll be happy to text it, email it. I'll put it in smoke signals, but I don't know that those get through very well. So whatever makes you happy, I'll get it to you that way. Overall, the next part of that is understanding the maximum operating depth. Now, maximum operating depth is a key factor in what we're doing, because we don't want to go past a specific point. Now, one of the things we're going to do and we're going to talk about is in marking our tanks, we're going to make sure that we're going to talk about how do we mark our tanks. And do we mark our tanks? The answer to that is, Aaron, do we mark our tanks on nitrox?
Anything that's not normal gas is marked.
Absolutely. And that's a great caveat to that. If you're diving, pick up a tank and it's got markings on it that you don't understand. For example, if it says 1845, I guarantee that's the wrong tank for you. If you pick up a tank that says 32%, and it's got somebody else's initials on it, unless you're prepared to meet the Dark Lord of the Deep, that is not your tank. That's a nitrox joke, by the way. You'll get it later. But overall, we also understand how deep we can go. So we're gonna make sure we mark our tanks with our initials, what blend it is on it, as well as its mod, or its maximum operating depth, which means how deep can we go on this safely. Figuring out the mod is really easy. We remember from the earlier we talked about 1.4 partial pressure is the maximum partial pressure for a working load, and 1.6 is the maximum operating partial pressure for depth. How we figure that out is really simple. 1.4 is our partial pressure of the cylinder. So we're going to take 1.4 divided by the partial pressure of the cylinder. So that's whatever that might be. Minus 1, because we have to get rid of the atmosphere. Remember, ATA is equal to 33. So an example, a diver wants to know how deep he can dive on a mixture of 40% nitrox. Simple enough. 1.4, our maximum partial pressure working load, divided by 0.4 equals 3.5. 3.5 minus the atmospheric tension, the surface tension, is 2.5. Simple enough. 2.5 times 33 feet, 82.5 feet is the maximum depth you can dive on 40% nitrox. Now let's go over our check. Now, just so you know, these little pink and white charts on the right-hand side, there's a straight from SSI. Those are not my charts. They're SSI's charts. So let's check ourselves. On 40%, right over here, 40%. They rounded up. I'm not a fan of that, but I always round down, but they rounded up to 83. So we'll give them the 6 inches. What's 6 inches among guy friends, right? Just throw them out there. You guys just let them go. All right. So 83 feet. So overall, it tells us our math is right. So again, 1.4 divided by 0.4, which are partial pressure. So who's got their pad and paper and their calculator and they're ready to do some math with me? Josh, what on 0.32? If I'm diving 0.32 or 32% nitrox, what's the deepest I can go?
Do you want me to calculate it or just read it off the chart?
Just I want you to calculate it. If I need to, I'll go to a different chart if I need to.
Can I just cheat and use my dive planner app?
So how about this? You have to give me the decimals too. You can read off the chart, but you have to give me the decimals, and the chart doesn't give you the decimals.
It's 111.375.
That's exactly right. All right, James, your turn. 21%. What is my maximum operating depth for 21%?
$187.00000000011.
There you go. Should come up to 186, but 0.999, but close enough. So you're getting the idea. Easy enough. 1.4 divided by 0.21 equals -1 equals multiplied by 33. Simple enough. It's definitely not rocket science, but understanding how to do these two simple pieces of math will definitely help you out, especially if you're in a third world country where their cell phone reception is not fantastic and you haven't thought to maybe download or make a copy of the gas for best mix or for mod. So it's definitely to your advantage. Most places will have a chart, but it's definitely to your advantage to have that. Make sense? Those two math formulas right there, I've got them memorized because they're not terribly complicated. And I never use a chart. I just grab my handy dandy cell phone with my calculator on it. I figure out what I talk about, what we're going to do, and then I do the math on it real quick, and then I order up my nitrox based upon what I want. If I'm not at a shop that does that, then I definitely make sure to check that I can do the dive we're talking about. Easy enough. So that's some of the hard stuff right there. We got through the laws. I'm glad we got through that. Nitrogen narcosis. This is insanely boring, and it's more interesting in the book to read it, but we'll go through it really quickly. Nitrogen narcosis, there's a bunch of theories on why nitrogen narcosis happens. There's the quasi-metabolic theory. There's the clethrate theory. There's the iceberg theory, the Meyer-Overton theory. There are some predisposing factors for nitrogen narcosis. We'll talk about the signs and symptoms of nitrogen narcosis and preventing and coping and adapting with nitrogen narcosis. I will tell you right now that I deleted a bunch of slides out of my presentation because they were so insanely boring and they're not on the test and they're nothing that you're ever going to want to learn again. So I hope you don't mind. But I do have this cool video about nitrogen narcosis. Did I show you guys this in open water? I did? Okay. Would you mind if we skipped it? Cool. All right. So the preceding theory on it overall of why we get nitrogen narcosis is really the Meyer-Overton theory. And it just basically states that I already fell asleep. Sorry. It just basically says that as nitrogen enters into the brain with this narcotic effect, that it blocks the neuron's ability to transmit across the dynamic. So that's enough on nitrogen narcosis for right now. So there's some predisposing factors that can increase the severity of nitrogen narcosis, and these include carbon dioxide buildup. When do you think you might get carbon dioxide buildup, Josh?
From holding your breath too long.
Holding your breath? Absolutely, holding your breath. James, what do you think? When do you think it might carbon dioxide buildup might happen?
Rapid breathing or not correctly serviced equipment.
Those are two excellent ones, and they're absolutely both true. They absolutely happen. So one of the things that happens is people will start short breathing during dives because they're getting nervous, they're getting excited, whatever it is. And as they start short breathing, they're causing a carbon dioxide buildup in their system. Here's another one that you may not have thought about. If we go down and the partial pressure of the gas we're breathing becomes higher, what does that mean to the density or the weight of the gas that we're breathing?
Well, it's getting heavier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly what's happening. It's getting heavier. So how easy would it be to breathe water?
Pretty hard.
Pretty hard. It's a very dense, it's very, it's 22 times heavier than air, right? So, and that's why we don't try and breathe liquid oxygen, right? It just doesn't work. It's too thick and too heavy for our system. So as we're trying to pump in and breathe this heavy gas at 33 feet is twice, at 66 feet is 3 times heavier, at 99 feet it's 4 times heavier. You think that it might cause a little bit more work on our heart, our lungs, our cardiovascular system, our brain? What do you think? Is that reasonable to think? So that's one of the things that absolutely happens. It's one of the big challenges that they're dealing with in deep sea diving is the weight of the gas. And there's a specific weight of gas where they get to the point where it becomes of extreme cardiac concern, right? And that's one of the reasons they're testing hydrogen out in deep water diving past 300 meters, which just blows me away. When you start getting into long dives at 300 meters, that's some insane diving right there. World record, by the way, is a little over 1,000 feet. So you start getting out of that depth. So what they found is they usually blend it with helium, and helium being 4 times lighter than air, it works to a certain point as well. But even helium gets to the point where it's too heavy, and that's why they're experimenting with hydrogen, because hydrogen is 1/4 the weight of helium. So they're able to divers are able to breathe hydrogen more easily at those deep depths. The only problem is we don't want to blow up our divers. So blowing up divers seems like it might be a bad thing to me, but I'm not sure. Overall, so carbon dioxide buildup happens because our body's not able to process the thicker gas. So that's something to absolutely be aware of. Rapid descent. If you go down too quickly, I've been with that diver. Hey, we're doing a 130-foot dive, and boom, shoot, they're like freaking watching Speedy Gonzalez go down. You're like, holy crap, dude, slow down. So rapid descents, absolutely. Give your body the ability to catch up and to acclimatize. So doing a controlled descent that's a reasonable descent is definitely to your advantage. It allows your body to start acclimatizing as you're going down. It allows your brain cells to be able to figure out how to communicate one with another, right? Anybody ever like in college, when I got rushed into my frat, they put a hood over my head and put us in a dark room, and then suddenly pulled the hood off my head. It's that disorienting, right? You need a second or two to figure out. If I just walked in the room, I could have figured everything out. But all of a sudden, being shoved into a dark room with a hood over my head and have that hood pulled off, it's like, oh, all right. Or you ever had your wife come in and start yelling at you about something you have no idea what she's mad about? If she just started in first gear and said, honey, you got to pick up your damn socks off the ground, because every time you don't do that, I have to come over and I have to take them all the way downstairs to the laundry room instead of coming in. It started in fourth gear. Sweetheart, I'm happy to argue with you, but can we start in first gear first? Same thing with your brain. You got to give your brain time to kind of catch up. Another thing is it's cold. The colder you get, the less your body is able to respond to change. Certain drugs and medications. If you are on any kind of drugs or medications, I encourage you strongly to go to the doctor and talk to them about that and how those will affect you in diving. I am not a physician or an MD in any shape or form, and so my medical advice means absolutely zero to you. Please consult either dan.org or a trained medical professional on this. Limited visibility and darkness. It goes back to that confusion issue. I have been with that diver. I was doing a deep dive course last summer with a student on a line where we had to do a descent through a cloud of yuck. You could see about 3 feet ahead around you, and that's it. And we got down to about 60 feet, and he couldn't see below him. He couldn't see the bottom, and he couldn't see the top, and he went into full panic mode. It happens. Limited visibility and darkness definitely scare things. Loss of orientation, not being able to tell which way is which. High air consumption. That's that heavy breathing we talked about. Another one, inexperience with depths below 60 feet. If you haven't done those dives and hadn't gone through that training and don't have that experience, you're not quite sure how it's going to affect you. Task loading. trying to do too many things at a time. My secret to diving is I pick the most important task first, and I do that one. And then I do the next most important task, and the next one. I love teaching solo diving just for this reason, because I like to get my divers at 60 feet to about a minute within deco going into deco, breaking the NDL, and then I give them 4 tasks in a row. I tell them they're out of air. They've got this happen. They've got that happen. And I'll give them 4 separate tasks, and they're pretty random tasks, and to see what happens. And watch them go into a panic because they're trying to do all 4 things at one time. And what they really need to do is figure out the most important. The first one is air. Second one is NDL. If you have enough air, NDL is not really that big a deal. If you break NDL, and if I break NDL, the non-decompression limits, and I've still got 3,000 pounds of gas in my tank, is it really a stressful thing? Can I get out of deco? Absolutely. In fact, I had that question the other day. Somebody said they were looking at one of my dives on the chart, and they noticed that at one point I came out of deco. I was in deco for about 10 or 15 minutes during the dive, and then all of a sudden the deco sign went away. They said, "Wait a minute, deco stopped?" I says, "Yeah, I came out of deco. I didn't need deco anymore. I could continue diving without deco." So deco does have an end point, and what that means is that the nitrogen is cleared enough that I can surface. It happens. At some point, it'll happen. Other things to be aware of: lack of sleep, exertion. Definitely make sure you're well rested and that you're not overloading. I mean, like Sunday's dive, I was carrying 80 pounds worth of freaking tanks on my back, and Aaron will tell you that carrying twin sets more than 2 inches from where you're at is just not fun, even 50 feet. And then you add a dry suit to that, and it's a lot of freaking weight. So make sure you're aware of that. It's one of the reasons I like to dive side mount, because the weight I carry the same amount of gas, just I distribute it a lot better, and it's a lot lighter. It's a lot easier to carry. Psychological outlook: expecting narcosis to be severe. If you're freaking out about it, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Anxiety: if you have too much anxiety over this, stop, reset, redo the dive. Time pressure: I promise you, the oceans will be there tomorrow. At no point in the next 60, 90 days in your lifetime are all the oceans going to dry up. Take your time. The secret to diving is taking it time, going slowly. Overall, and then finally, fatigue. Make sure you're well rested. Signs and symptoms of nitrogen narcosis to be aware of: a feeling of relaxation, lightheadedness, euphoria, slowed response, a feeling of well-being, increased judgment errors or giddiness, dexterity or fine dexterity issues, or deterioration of fine dexterity, fixation of an idea, time distortion, deterioration of multitask reasoning. Again, focus on one task at a time. Numbness, tingling, sleepiness, inability to remember parts of the dive. That's a very common one. Most people report that they won't remember the entire dive. That seems like a bad thing to me. Let's see. Confusion, unable to process basic things, semi-conscious, distorted memory of the dive. I saw mermaids. That's a real thing that actually happened. We were some of us were out on a dive, saw a gal. She was laughing hysterically and doing this, and then laughing hysterically. Obviously, we went down, got her, pulled her up by the arm, got her to the boat, get to the safe stop, got her to the boat, and said, "What were you laughing at? And what was this?" She says, "I was parting the ocean so I could see the mermaids." Definitely narked. So just be aware that those are things that happen. So obviously that goes under decreased conceptual reasoning, visual hallucinations, auditory hallucination, paranoia, and anxious feelings all kind of fall into that together. So does it, I've got a typo there. I apologize for that. Let's see. Like I said, some of these slides are just me. Does narcosis cause any complications? Yes and no. Let's see. Where'd my mouse go? There it is. Nitrogen narcosis is fairly common and temporary, but doesn't mean it can't have lasting effects. Some divers who develop nitrogen narcosis become too disoriented to swim to shallower water. In other cases, a diver can slip into a coma while still deep underwater. Watching a special at the deadliest dive site on Earth. They had a diver that wanted to go out, and he wanted to go to the deepest part of the Red Sea blue hole, right? and they couldn't get anybody to do it. So he took himself and a single tank, and he got down to 130 feet, and then felt it pertinent to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And finally, he got to about 190 feet, and he didn't have enough buoyancy to be able to get out. He ended up passing out from nitric narcosis and dying. He literally just ran out of air because he was way too deep. So be aware. Nitric narcosis can have lasting effects, especially while you're diving. If you start to feel any of those, it's definitely time to start heading to the surface. If you get to the shallower water and it doesn't subside, you need to stop your dive and head in to the boat. And if you still feel fatigue, loss of appetite, headache, tendon joint swelling, dizziness, pain, trouble breathing, double vision, speaking difficulties, muscle weakness, or flu-like symptoms, it's time to call your dive day. So how is it treated? Pretty simple. If you have mild symptoms, you can stay in shallower water with your dive partner or dive team for a while and wait for it to clear. But once symptoms have cleared, you can resume your dive at shallower depths. Give your body a chance to expel that nitrogen and subside for the symptoms. So if your symptoms don't resolve once you reach shallow waters, you need to end your dive and head to the surface and finish your dive and finish your day. Does all that make sense, guys? Pretty long thing to kind of go through, but how about the effects of oxygen on a diver? So let's talk about hypoxia, hypoxia, which is low oxygen, the physiological types of hypoxia, symptoms of hypoxia, prevention, hypoxia, as well as oxygen toxicity, CNS, central nervous system toxicity, factors that lower tolerances to high pressure oxygen, and etiology and physiology of CNS and oxygen toxicity. That sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? All right. So oxygen toxicity signs and symptoms. This was interesting. Dr. J. Lauren first described toxic effects of oxygens in 1899. Some of these scientists were well ahead of their time. I mean, these guys were like pyramid builders, in my opinion. He noted the severity of the effects increased with a partial pressure and that the effects were largely reversible. That's important to catch there. Now, toxic effects of oxygen at partial pressures between 0.45 and 1.6 are primarily in the lungs. After that, 1.6, the signs and symptoms are primarily in the brain. So we have a physical versus a mental response. When you start hitting that 1.6, we start having mental issues instead of just physical issues. Now, oxygen signs and symptoms, the earliest sign of pulmonary lung oxygen toxicity. I'm going to back up here. So the book makes this sound that I go over 1.6, I'm going to immediately go into convent. I'm going to go into convulsions. I'm going to vomit. I'm going to freak out, lose all my vision. It's not exactly the case, but it's not always also untrue, depending upon how you process oxygen toxicity. So the earliest signs of pulmonary oxygen toxicity, and this is not in your book, are mild irritation in the trachea, the throat, that's made worse as you deeply breathe. A mild cough, followed by more severe irritation and cough until breathing becomes really painful and the cough becomes uncontrollable. If oxygen exposure is continued, the person is going to start noticing a tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, as well as shortness of breath. If oxygen exposure is continued long enough, the person is going to die from lack of oxygen. Your body's not able to process that oxygen correctly. So the progressive damage to the lungs eventually makes it impossible for the oxygen and to get into the blood and pass through. It's too heavy, right? You get to a 200% partial pressure of oxygen that literally the air is too heavy for you to breathe and your body can't process. You know, here's the good news. The time onsets of these symptoms. Most individuals can tolerate 12 to 16 hours at 100% oxygen. It's a long time. 8 to 14 hours at a partial pressure of 1.5 and 3 to 6 hours at a partial pressure of 200%. That's a long time. Now, there's several ways to track developing pulmonary oxygen toxicity, but the most sensitive and accurate is the development of symptoms. The second technique is to monitor the vital capacity. Now, vital capacity is the amount of air that can be moved in one large breath, decreases with the increasing pulmonary toxicity. A reduction of approximately 2% in vital capacity correlates with mild symptoms. while a reduction of 10% correlates symptoms so severe that most individuals will not voluntarily continue to breathe. The mild effects are completely reversible with no permanent lung damage. However, severe ones can take 2 to 4 weeks to heal. So let's kind of talk about that for a minute. Mild symptoms, most individuals can tolerate 8 to 14 hours at 1.5 and 3 to 6 hours at 2.0. Now, everybody's different. And I can tell you right now that if you breathe in 2.0, you're going to definitely increase your odds of big problems, right? But the good news is you're going to go back to noticing the signs and symptoms that look like this. Irritation of the throat, coughing, okay? Tightness of chest, difficulty breathing. Overall, that's what you need to be aware of. So this is kind of my good news slide, I think, at least in my opinion, is that we talk about this being this, oh my God, I hit 1.7, I'm going to die. You're not going to die right this minute. In a couple hours, bad things are going to happen. So when I carry a pony bottle, for example, just to give you kind of a thought process in Benjamin's world, my pony bottle, I keep at 60%. I don't care how deep I'm diving on that. Usually, if I'm carrying a pony bottle, I'm only using a pony bottle for 130-foot dives. But if there's a catastrophic out-of-air emergency and I'm with a student or I'm with me, I will absolutely hand them that 60% blend and have them breathe off that, or I will breathe off that as we begin our ascent. Now, Josh, what's our maximum operating depth for a 60% blend?
$55
43.
Oh, I did it 1.6.
Oh, okay. At 1.4. 1.4 is 43. So you're absolutely right. You got it down. So really, we shouldn't be breathing that below 55 feet, right? That's pretty high. So if I'm at 130 feet and I hand that to a student or I use it myself, that's pretty high partial pressure. In fact, what is the partial pressure of oxygen at 130 feet? Who's got it for me? It's high. Partial pressure 0.6 at 130.
2.96.
Is that pretty high?
Yeah.
You think there's going to be a problem if I breathe 2.96 for a long period of time?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But if I have an out-of-air emergency and I start heading to the surface with that, do you think that might be a good thing? Will I blow off nitrogen a lot faster if I start that on a direct ascent to the surface? Absolutely. I'm flushing the nitrogen out very quickly. That's what I do. There's a lot of people who disagree with it, but if you look at the numbers and the facts, it absolutely makes perfect sense. Aaron, what do you think of that process?
I would agree. Also, most injuries and most maladies are treated by 100% oxygen. So,
but if we're at 130 feet and you're out of gas and I hand you the equivalent of 296% gas oxygen at 130 feet, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
better than drowning.
Absolutely. And if we have to do a fairly quick ascent, would that be a lot better for your system with nitrogen on a quick ascent?
Yes.
Absolutely. We're flushing a crap load of nitrogen out of our system very quickly. And so we actually would decrease our chance of getting the bends very, very quickly. So that's what's not in the book. And that's what to be aware of. But let's go back to the book. So the way the book wants you to remember, if you when you start getting oxygen toxicity, is convented. And convented means convulsions, like grand mal seizures. Generally, I can't imagine a grand mal seizure ever having a warning. So I always wonder why they had to add usually without warning. I'm like, I have yet to see anybody an epileptic say, "Hey, wait a minute, hey guys, can I get attention? I'm going to have a grand mal seizure real quick." hold on, up here, 3, 2, 1. And they have their grand mal seizure. I have to see a notice on a grand mal seizure. Aaron, you ever seen a notice on a grand mal seizure?
Well, my brother-in-law has them, and he says that just before he has them, he has like a weird feeling, but it's like 2 seconds before it happens. So it's not like it's going to give you.
Exactly. It's not like sending an email on this. Dear Aaron, just thought I'd let you know while I'm sitting here that I was thinking about having a grand small seizure in just a few moments. So send. It's not like you. So I like that. So the next thing is the V is going to be vision, tunnel vision, or other changes, ears ringing, nausea, twitching, irritability, and dizziness. Now, James, which one of these symptoms would I notice in you?
Convulsions would be the primary one.
Absolutely.
Irritability, maybe, if you know your dive partner.
But I couldn't hear your ears ringing.
No.
Maybe nausea? Twitching? If I know my dive partner well enough, I might be able to notice if they're irritable. I definitely know when my wife's irritable because she's a very patient and kind soul. And when my wife gets irritable, I definitely pick up on it very quickly. And I also duck because I know that if my wife's irritable, then bad things are happening. There's something major wrong. So things to be aware of as we look at our dive partner. I've talked about this and I said this before. Diving is the most self-aware sport you could possibly ever be in. As you go into the water is how you should feel coming out of the water, right? So as we go along with a dive partner, we should be taking a mental account of how do I feel during my dive? How do I feel after my dive? What does that look like? Check in with yourself. It's not a bad thing to do, but also check in with your dive buddy. Hey, you doing okay? I noticed you kind of stumbling and the boat wasn't really rocking that much. You doing okay there, bud? I noticed you yakking over the side. What's going on? Have a good idea of that. And so as you go through this process, be aware of yourself and aware of your dive buddy as well. So let's get some questions. First, who's got it for me? As you dive deeper, the narcotic effect of nitrogen gets. Who's got it?
I'd say greater.
Greater is exactly right. Do you agree, Josh? You have to unmute for me to hear you, Josh.
Yeah, sorry, I was nodding.
There we go. Perfect. If you both go ahead and unmute for a minute, I got looks like 5 more questions for you guys. First one to get it wins. All right. Which of the following is not a symptom of decompression sickness?
Cyanosis.
Cyanosis is exactly right. Ding, 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 ding. All right. Even if a diver suffers from decompression sickness in a remote location, you should never
Recompress the diver.
Exactly. There's no sense in creating a drowning victim and a DCS case. Hypoxic hypoxia is by far the most common form of hypoxia. That's just fun to say. This condition is...
I'm going to say A, where the partial pressure of oxygen is too low.
That's exactly right. When oxygen pressure in the body drops below partial pressure of 0.17, mild symptoms of hypoxia occur. Blackout and death may occur when the partial pressure is what?
0.10.
Exactly. Had you asked you to memorize that earlier. And finally, a possible source of contaminated air in scuba cylinders is?
A.
Exactly. So you'll find that on site, that sometimes they put the exhaust too close to the intake. It absolutely can happen. So let's talk a little bit about decompression theory. J.S. Haldane was an absolute genius in the 50s. He and Workman worked very closely together to come up with some basic decompression models, and then finally Bullman took over to the idea. So Henry's law comes into a portion here. We talked a little bit about Henry earlier, but it talks about how the partial pressure of the gas we're breathing dissolves in a liquid at a constant temperature. And it's important to remember that constant temperature portion and the agitation. So as our heart's beating, if we're breathing really fast, we're going to uptake nitrogen even faster. If we're breathing really fast and we're in a cold environment, we're going to uptake nitrogen even faster than that. So that's basically what's happening. What we need to be aware of is that we're taking this partial pressure, this new partial pressure, for example, 33 feet, we're taking in a partial pressure of 42%, 158%, right, of each gas, 42% oxygen, 158% nitrogen. We're taking that as our new partial pressure, and our body's going to equalize, create equilibrium into our cell tissue and our fast and slow tissue, right? So as we go through this process, we're breathing this in. The agitation is going to cause it to go through, and how cold we are or how warm we are is also going to take into account that as well. Now, this happens in reverse as well. As we start to ascend from whatever depth we're at, that partial pressure is going to come out of our system and go back into our bloodstream, which being agitated a liquid, and eventually through the heart and into the lungs, out to the alveoli, where it expel that partial pressure of gas. So we need to be aware of that as we breathe faster and at higher partial pressures of oxygen, we're going to flush that nitrogen out even quicker. And that's how we're going to expel the inert gas elimination is through that system of process. As it comes out of our fast and slow tissue, the sinews, the fat, the blood, the bone, as it comes out, it's going to have to go back through the venous system and into the alveoli, and we're just going to eventually just breathe it out. All right, I'm going to skip that. And we talked about this last night, the safety stop. Again, I just want to, now that we kind of get a better idea of this and a little bit more, we'll go through it just basically overall. So overall, as we talk about this, I need you guys to realize that there's no perfect model for everybody. Now, the good news is when I teach deep dive class, I do have a handheld Doppler radar, and I can actually find the line. There is a small device that's about the size of a hockey puck, and literally 30 minutes after the dive, we put it on your collarbone and we measure the arterial gas on both sides and the size of the bubbles, and we do that once at an hour after the dive. We can actually measure the size of the bubbles. But until then, we're basing everything off an algorithm. Now, anybody into quarter mile racing, like Fast and the Furious, kind of 1/4 mile at a time racing? Anybody ever watch that? Dragsters, muscle cars, Honda Civics, all that fun stuff. You ever watch that? James, you ever watch the 1/4 mile stuff?
No.
NASCAR? You didn't watch NASCAR or anything like that?
No.
We'll get the basic idea that if I put a 300 horsepower engine into a 1-ton Ram pickup, how fast is it going to run the 1/4 mile? Maybe 15 seconds, 16 seconds, 14 seconds, right? If I take that same 300 horsepower engine and I put it in a 150-pound motorcycle, will it go faster? So basically, this is telling us that the gas, the algorithm, is the 300 horsepower engine, right? Our bodies are all built differently, and how that 300 horsepower engine affects your body versus Josh's body versus Aaron's body is very, very different overall. It takes different amounts of things to do. So we can't base our life off of one generic algorithm. I can tell you right now that if I were to eat a Krispy Kreme donut, it affects me pretty big. I gain a pound. As James, you eat a Krispy Kreme donut, it probably doesn't affect you at all, right? Little Kayla in our class, she could probably eat a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts and she'd probably lose a pound, little turd. But overall, the idea is saying, okay, one Krispy Kreme donut causes you to gain a pound. That doesn't work for everybody. And the same thing with the algorithm. The Bowman 16C algorithm is fantastic and a great guideline. But the problem is you can't make a guideline on paper that says that fits everybody. So that's what we're telling you here, is that the M value is different for everybody that we deal with overall. And there's this larger gray area. The good news is that with our deep dive class, I will be able to actually measure your M value, and we can actually determine where you're at on the M value scale. Overall, what I want you to take away from this simply is that more decompression, longer safety stops means safer, means more nitrogen elimination means less symptoms. The more towards that edge that you try and get, the more M value you hit up, the less deco you do, the more direct descents you do, the better chance you're going to have of problems. Now, a lot of this we covered last night, so I'm going to skip a few of these. So overall, we talked about this as well. So dive computers. So the history of dive computers is actually pretty interesting overall. They were first conceptualized in the 70s. But the problem is we all know in the 70s, we just didn't have the technology to build them. But we said, the Navy said, we need these. We need these bad. And so they started finally coming out in the mid 70s, and they came out with their first dive computer, and it was classified. It was actually top secret. The idea of the first dive computers was the ability to give tactical divers a more tactical advantage over our enemies. Let them be able to stay down longer and be more stealthy, basically, so they could accomplish missions more than what the enemy can do underwater, as well as keep the diver safe. Their whole goal was overall keep the diver safe, but keep them down as long as possible. So the cool thing with what a dive computer really does, its intended use, is it's designed to measure based upon the algorithm from Bullman what the amount of nitrogen uptake in your body is. So that's both an advantage and a disadvantage as well, because again, it's going off a basic algorithm. Now, the good news is through trial and tribulation and experimentation on Navy divers over the years, the algorithm and the safety factors have been built quite a bit. So what they've done is they've built it to the least common denominator. But the challenge with that is they're basically saying, okay, we've got 10 people on the track. We've got Josh, James, Usain Bolt, Benjamin, and the guy from Whale. We're all going to race. Whoever comes in last, that's how we're going to set the standard. So as long as you can pass the standard for the guy that's 700 pounds, everybody's good. So what they've done is they set the limitations and the factors to the least common denominator. So that's the limitation, is while it is measuring nitrogen absorption based upon an algorithm, it's not measuring yours. So be aware that it's just a guideline, and you still can develop symptoms even based upon this, because remember, it's not exactly personalized to you. It's based upon a group of averages. Now, overall, as we're diving, we need to be aware that different dive profiles impact decompression differently. And diving at altitude definitely affects diving as well, and your amount of nitrogen uploading as well. If you're diving at lower partial pressure, then you have to be aware that you're diving deeper than what you think. So multi-level diving is a great way to do it. Absolutely. There's in the 70s and 80s, there was a scientist came out. His name was Pyle. He's since been proven wrong, and I disagree with him firmly when it comes to what he talked about, but he believed in an idea called deep stops or pile stops. And what pile stops basically said is that if I go to 130 feet, when I'm ready to ascend, I need to make a stop at 50% of the depth. So at basically 65 feet, I need to stop and do a decompression stop. Now, why do you think that might actually be a problem if you look at the algorithms? Maybe we have an idea why stopping at 65 feet and waiting might be a problem in non-decompression diving? Aaron, do you have an idea?
You're still absorbing nitrogen.
I'm sorry. So what'd you say, Josh?
You're still absorbing nitrogen.
Ding, 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 ding. That's exactly right. Good job. High five. I'll give you your high five there. It's an air five, right? Perfect. You're still absorbing. So you're still on gassing. So if you stop at 60 feet, you haven't been down long enough at your 130 feet to get to a true M value or to a true max value. You'll still have, now while your fast tissues will be off gassing, the majority, in most cases, 80% of your tissues will still be on gassing. So you're still on gassing at 60 feet. As long as you do your ascent slowly enough and get to your safety stop to the point where you can allow all your tissue compartments to off gas. Now, trivia for you, James, today. How many tissue compartments do we theoretically have?
That's a tough one. I think it's 8.
Multiply by 2.
16 then.
There we go. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, that's why we call it the Bowman 16C, because it talks about 16 tissue compartments, and it's revision 3, because it's the C version of it. So there was an A, B, and now we're on a C. Good news is the C came out 15 years ago, and it's still proven true, and there's not a D version coming out anytime soon from what I can tell. So we've got a nice safe algorithm, but it just tells you that Have been changes, and originally there was 4, then there was 8, and then Bowman came out and determined there were 16 theoretical compartments for his algorithm. So the problem is that on multi-level diving, if you're utilizing that as we come up, let's see, get my mouse over here. As we come up to this first stop, while we're certainly off-gassing some of our deeper tissue, we're still on-gassing the majority of our tissue and each one of these multi-level points. So certainly coming up at a slow pace is to our advantage. Stopping because we're trying to get a benefit of off-gassing is not. Make sense? So let's figure out how to actually figure out what we're diving and how long we can dive. You all have access to the dive tables, right? Does everybody have access to dive tables?
Yeah, they're in the appendix summary.
They are. They look just like this. There's we're going to add one more set of charts for you. And the new chart we're going to add is the equivalent depth. So here's what it looks like to you. And this is what's in your chart section. So if I do a 100-foot dive on air, it's 100 feet. If I do a 100-foot dive on nitrox at 30% nitrox, it's equal to 117 feet. So if I go back over to my dive tables and I'm diving and I don't have a nitrox table, but I just have an air table, I can now use 110 feet as my new depth for nitrox because I always round down. I don't round back up. So this is our equivalent. Now, the magic question is we have some yellow here. Josh, why do we have yellow?
The yellow's over the 1.4.
It is. And red is when we're hitting that 1.6 line. We're getting to that point where we're at 1.5 or above and we need to be concerned. So we definitely want to make sure we're staying in the white as we plan this out. The nice thing with this chart, this equivalent depth chart, based upon the fraction of oxygen, is it also gives us our partial pressure. So you're able to figure that out. And in a moment, that's going to be very, very important. But overall, it's a simple chart to read. 130 feet on air is equal to 130 feet. On 26% nitrox, you could dive to 141 feet. It's equal to 130-foot air dive. Makes sense? Pretty simple. Now, here's where we start getting into the clock. Now, we have 2 numbers on our clock. We have our single dive limit, and we have our 24-hour limit. So this is the single dive limit is the maximum amount of time at a partial pressure I can dive in one dive. The 24-hour limit is the maximum amount of time I can do over the course of multiple dives in a 24-hour period. So at a 1.1 partial pressure of oxygen on a 24-hour clock, I can't dive more than 270 minutes at 1.1. Now, here's where this gets important. So if I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a 100-foot dive on 30% nitrox, that's 1.36. Simple enough. I'm going to go over 1.36. I'll go down to 1.4 for safety. The maximum dive time I can do at 1.4 is 150 minutes. Now, that's a long time. That's 2 hours and 10 minutes or 2 hours and 30 minutes, right? So overall, that's a nice long dive. And it means over the course of a day, I can only do a total of 180 minutes. So I can do 150 minutes in one dive and 30 more minutes on the second dive. Now, here's the thing as well as we start looking at this. If I were to do 5 minutes at 150 or at 1.4, that's 3% of my total nitrogen uptake for both my daily limit as well as my single dive limit. Overall, and these are cumulative, right? So if I did a 60-minute dive at a 1.4, 60 minutes is 40% of my single dive limit, 33% of my total daily limit. Easy enough so far? So basically, simple enough. Josh, if I did 4 dives at 1.4, how much of my total dive, or let's just do 2. I do 2 dives. That's easier math for you. Give you a break today. 2 dives at 1.4 for 60 minutes each. How much of my total daily have I taken of the oxygen I could take?
66%.
Absolutely. Now we talk about this. This is our dose limit, our auction dose limit. It's just like taking aspirin. I mean, you take an aspirin, the maximum dose you can take of an aspirin is 3 aspirin or 2 aspirin, whatever it is on the thing, right? Yeah, I think it's generally 2 aspirin. Don't take more than 2 aspirin at a time. Don't take more than this amount of dose. If you're doing Ambien, your dose is 1 Ambien per 24-hour period, whatever it is. I don't know. I don't take Ambien. So, but overall, so this is your actual dose. So as I go through this, if I'm at a 100% auction and I dive for 30 minutes, that means I've taken 10% of the total dose of auction that I'm allowed, that I can do in one dive. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. It's pretty straightforward overall. It's definitely not rocket science. As we go down into the deeper categories, we start splitting that out, and now we have a single dose limit and a total 24-hour dose limit. So we can see really quickly at 1.2 for 25 minutes, I have a 12% dose limit on one dive and a daily limit of 10%. So that means I can do 10 25-minute dives on 1.2% over the course of a day before I hit 100%. Now, with this, the recommended from SSI, SDI, TDI, NAUI, and PADI is that you don't ever go over 80% of your total daily recommended dose. What they're telling you is leave a safety margin. Make sense? Safety margin is not bad. So when you use these two charts together, simply enough, I know that if I'm doing 70 feet on 29% nitrogen or nitrox, I'm at a 0.991. If I'm doing 36% blend of nitrox at 70 feet, I'm at a 1.39 blend. So I can use this to quickly find what my partial pressure max is going to be. I can use the second chart to figure out what my dose is going to be. Now, let's make this really easy for you guys. A dive computer will do this for you. It'll track the partial pressure of auction as well as the amount of dose that you're uptaking. It's worth it to have a computer. It'll track this for you and help keep you safe as well. Because the problem is, let's see, do I have it? I do. I don't. I thought I did. Hold on, give me a second here. Where did Shearwater go? You ever go looking for an app that you know should be on your computer and you're like, where the hell did they go? Interesting. Macintosh seems to have deleted my Shearwater app. That is interesting. I've been bad about using it anyway on the computer. Oh, there it is. Let's see. Oh, I got to remember my password. There we go. That's my password. Here we go. Let's just go to I want to give you an actual dashboard here, Garmin Connect. Yes, if somebody ever got into my computer, I would be absolutely screwed because all my passwords are saved on my computer. What happened to Garmin? That's there's Shearwater here. That's just weird. Oh well, is what it is. Let's see. Here we go. So as we do our initial calculations, this is what the initial calculation will look like. But in truth, here's what our actual dive will look like overall. It won't be a straight pattern. We're not going to drop down, stay at a specific level for a period of time, and then come straight back up. Overall, our dive is going to be multi-dimensional. It's going to go up and down. As you might guess, the partial pressure is going to differentiate and be different than it is here to here. So overall, so be aware, and that's the nice thing with the dive computer is it'll calculate all that for you. I'm kind of disappointed in my Shearwater today. I wonder why that's not coming up. Or we're just coming up on a different screen, not seeing it. Nope. I guess I got to reinstall Shearwater. So that's one of the benefits of having a Shearwater or a dive computer is that you're going to be able to calculate multi-depth oxygen partial pressures a lot more accurately. Does that make sense, guys? Good deal? Okay. Pretty straightforward stuff. All righty. The other nice thing the computer will do is it'll definitely figure out flying after diving for you. It should have a fly clock on it for you as well. So let's talk about a couple things that are really pretty important. So analyzing your nitrox cylinder is important. If you are going to dive nitrox, who is responsible for the blend in your nitrox tank?
You.
Yeah, absolutely. Who should analyze your tank?
Well, I mean, you should, but I mean, can't other people if you're present there?
As long as you're present and directly supervising, I say it's okay. But I don't prefer it and I don't like it. I only like to analyze my own tank to make sure it's done correctly. Some of the quality of staff that I have seen on dive boats, and not to talk badly about them, sometimes I wonder if they're smart enough to be able to pick their own nose. They're not always the most intelligent people I've ever seen on this planet. So I would rather be the tank monkey analyzing my own tank and making sure exactly what's happening is being done right. Now, the simple process of this is once you get your nitrox analyzer is to make sure it's calibrated. Simple, turn it on, wave it in the air for a few seconds, let it zero itself out, and then calibrate it to the current partial pressure of oxygen in the air, which should be what?
.21.
Yeah, 0.21. Simple enough. It's not a trick question. Another way we can make sure that it's correct is to analyze it on a bottle of known gas. So we can go over to just a bottle of regular air, and we can go ahead and analyze on that. Now, the first process, what we're going to do is once we've calibrated our nitrox analyzer, and they come in a lot of different shapes and fashions. The ones at the shop are cylindrical. You turn them on by twisting it, twist it to calibrate, and there's a pitot at the end. So they put it over, you turn your tank on a little bit, let it hiss gently, not fast, to its. Once you get it hissing, give me 1 second. There we go. I've got Nikki going to get me a tank and an analyzer. Once we get that tank on gently, we're going to stick that analyzer over the end, and we're going to allow it to read the percentage of gas in our tank very slowly. And what you'll see is the numbers will start changing, and they'll keep changing, and they'll keep changing. When they slow down and finally stop, that's your gas. Give it long enough to read that out, but not so long that you run out all the gas in your tank. So take your time, let it happen, but don't go too quickly. There's several different ways to do that. Do them. There's a lot of different analyzers. Make sure you have a good understanding of the analyzer you're using. There are ones that go over the end of the tank, over the yoke, or into the din, and you turn it on, and it doesn't lose any gas, and it keeps going until it reads the actual gas in the tank. Does that make sense? Perfect. Thank you. So we have a nice little oxygen tank here. You guys all see that just fine? This is actually a deco bottle. So simple enough, and it's marked nitrox on the top. The trick is this is a new deco bottle I haven't had a chance to use yet, so you can see it's not set up yet. The trick is getting the stupid plastic thing off on a new bottle. I hate these stupid things. There it goes. All right. As you can see, it's a nice little yoker. So when we turn this on, Can you hear it? Very gently, right? Okay. I'm gonna set that aside. We take our nitrox analyzer. As you can see on this, it's currently off. So we're just going to click it on the bottom here. And the battery's dead. Apparently I left it on. So I've got to replace the battery on this. But here's where it comes on. You just turn this on. There's a nice little digital reading. Once you turn it on, it'll come on and it'll give you a reading. We'll twist this knob until it gets to 21%. And then we're going to let it sit for a little bit. Okay. I can't believe I killed the battery in this thing already. I have to get my screwdriver and take that damn thing apart. All right. Well, good times. It takes a special battery anyway that I don't have. I can't believe I left it on. But once you've got it on and in good mode, all you're going to do is take your tank. Here, I'll back up a little bit here. So you also can see it. See this pitot on the end. We turn our tank on gently, very gently. We're going to stick that over the end. You got to turn it down a little bit because you just want to come out a little bit. And you're going to leave it over the end so that pitot, the little hole in the end, is covering that. And let it continue going until it finally goes to the point where the sensor stops moving. I'm very disappointed. I killed the battery in my auction analyzer. I will replace that tomorrow, I guess. Maybe the next day. I don't know if I have time tomorrow. But anyway, that's basically what it looks like. That's the process. It's definitely not rocket science. Now, how nitrox impacts your total diving system, increased oxidation and wear, and the risk of fire explosion. So earlier in the night, we talked about Rule 40, or the nitrox Rule 40, or of that. And there's a lot of different variations of that rule. Why do you think we talk about nitrox being Rule 40? If you read your homework, it was in there.
Anything above 40%, you need to clean your equipment.
Well, you should clean it anything over 21%. But more accurately, most gear is designed to be used up to 40% without major modifications. While you should use a Viton O-rings, and you should have it auction clean, the basic gear that you're using will be sufficient to be able to handle up to the wear and tear from up to 40% nitrox. Most gear is set to be able to use up to 40% nitrox. So you should be able to buy 95% of the gear off the shelf and it'd be ready for use with nitrox. Anything above that, you need to make sure that it's rated for that blend or higher. The thing about it is as we use higher percentages of oxygen, we have to remember that we're dealing with something that will cause oxidation and it'll wear our gear out more quickly. It literally breaks it down and causes it to deteriorate. It's also one of the reasons we don't use pure oxygen or nitrox as a dry suit chemical or gas, because it can actually wear your dry suit out. So the other thing is the higher the percentage of oxygen, the more explosive or ability to cause fire or to burn, right? Fire feeds off oxygen, right? Not nitrogen, but oxygen. So the higher the percentage of oxygen, the more the risk of fire that we deal with. So using with standard scuba equipment, nitrox, the rule of the 40% rule is that most gear is designed to be used with up to 40%. All right, so let's see, we talked about that last night. So marking our gear is extremely important. Now I can tell you overall, with your gear, you should mark it several times. Now, as we get a nitrox cylinder, we put it together at the shop, we're going to make sure that we put on it. I don't use a tag, and I don't believe in using tags like this because they come off, they get torn off. Here's what I would like you guys to get in the habit of doing. Take a piece of duct tape. You put it on the side of the cylinder. Make sure you put in the percentage, the mod, and make sure after the mod, you put on it feet, FT. Why do you think that's important? James, why do you think it'd be important to make sure you annotate that this is in feet?
Imperial instead of metric system if you go overseas.
Absolutely. There was recently a couple of big accidents where they put everything in feet or they put it in meter and the diver thought it was feet. So they definitely had some bigger issues with that. So make sure you put the actual mod in it, and you can put it the partial pressure as well. Put the date on it and make sure you initial it. Now, I put it on a piece of duct tape right below the valve so it's easily seen. I also, at the base of the tank on both the front and the back in nice large letters, I also put the mod on there as well in feet. MOD 104 feet. MOD 85 feet. And I put it on the front and the back. And then for my deco cylinders, I will also put a piece right on the bottom. So at the top, on the bottom of the side, both sides, and the bottom, that way it's well marked. And what I want to be able to be seen is if I'm swimming away and I've got it taped big on the bottom, and my dive buddy or diver is behind me, and he looks at his computer and says, wait a minute, we're at 130 feet and your mod says 85 feet, he'll be able to see that very easily. Come tap me on the shoulder. Hey, you need to head up. So at the neck, both sides and large letters, and on the bottom. The last thing we ever want to do is have an issue with going below mod. And the best way to protect that is to make sure that we're making it clear for not only for us to see, for other people to see as well. And again, on that neck sill, always initial it, because we want to know that that is your tank, not somebody else's tank. Now, to make sure we're getting an actual nitrox tank, you'll notice that every tank needs to be visually inspected once a year. If it's prepared and ready for nitrox, it'll also have a sticker on it, and it'll look like that. There's the one from Idaho Dive Pirates saying that it is currently tank valve has been cleaned and serviced for nitrox for pure auction. Now I can tell you, I have it marked that I've got it cleaned up because I'm getting ready to put it together as a deco bottle. But that bottle is 60%. I know that right off the top of my head. I've already tested it. I just haven't marked it because it's mine. Anyway, so you want to make sure that it's O2 clean. How do you think we O2 clean something, James?
They replace the O-rings and they take out any kind of hydrochemicals that are inside.
Yep. So we want to make sure we clean the interior. So we emptied out, we cleaned it completely. We do a little simple green through it, and we clean that up really well to make sure we get any of the oxidation out of it. So it's prepared. We change out the O-rings with Viton O-rings that are designed to be able to stand up to the time. So that's pretty much it. All right. So guys, tonight we went over quite a bit. I'm going to stop presenting so you can see my bright, shiny, happy face. So we went over quite a bit. Overall, through this process, we talked about partial pressure using nitrox and its benefits. We talked about the partial pressures. We also talked about the partial pressures that are important. For example, for hypoxia and anoxia, what happens if we get too low or too high a partial pressure of oxygen. Talked about the benefits of less nitrogen in our blend. We touched on Henry's law as well as Dalton's law in practical, and we talked about those in practical application. We definitely put together and did the math together as for Dalton's law and why that's important for best mix. So we can figure out the best mix of nitrox for whatever depth and dive we're doing. And we also did the math for maximum operating depth, otherwise known as the mod. We touched on nitrogen narcosis a little bit more than just touched on, but we went over nitrogen narcosis pretty in depth. We also talked about the effects of oxygen on the diver and how the high partial pressures of oxygen can be dangerous, but we definitely talked about the CNS, the central nervous system toxicity, what that really looks like, what are real limits on that, and not to be quite as afraid of it, but definitely be concerned. The signs and symptoms of that as well. We did some quizzes. We talked a little bit about decompression theory. how inert gas is eliminated. We touched on the safety stop as well. Went over the history of the dive computers a little bit, talked about differential diving. And then finally, we got to the point where we talked about the equivalent depth in feet based upon nitrox, as well as the CNS clock, both very important. We briefly went over, but unfortunately, your instructor was dumb and left his nitrox analyzer on and killed the battery, so I wasn't able to go through all of that, but I think you guys got a pretty good understanding of that. Talked about fire hazard and risks, as well as the things we need to be aware of with purchasing scuba gear to make sure that it meets the 40% rule. The only thing we didn't talk about, make sure that with all your delivery systems, buoyancy compensators, and that you stick with the SSI service and equipment servicing program, and make sure that those are inspected yearly. It's just to your advantage, especially or before any big trip. So easy enough. We went over a lot, guys. What questions do you have?
I got nothing.
Gotcha. Who has done all their homework? Excellent. And the final exam as well? All passed off? Fantastic. Good news is I've got your paperwork in my little bag. So when you see me tomorrow, make sure you get together with me so we can finish your paperwork. I've just got a couple of signatures and some initials I will need, and you'll be all signed off. I have already signed off all your open water paperwork as well. So there's nothing for you to sign off on that. You just need to make sure you show up and pass both days of my grueling open water instructor days at the lake at Belmont Hot Springs. They're not that hard. Aaron will tell you I'm pretty kind and gentle when it comes to that kind of stuff. But we'll make sure you have some fun with that as well. So show up both days and we'll log some dives. My goal is to have you guys walk away with a minimum of 4 dives, hopefully up to 6 dives. 6 dives being the maximum we can do tomorrow and Sunday. So good to go. Awesome.
So
Yes, sir.
when we get new tanks tomorrow, we're going to get a nitrox tank, right?
Nope. I'm just driving you out of air. There is zero benefit to diving at the Belmont in the 85-degree water at 20 feet with nitrox.
Okay.
You will not. I promise you 1,000 times over that at 20 feet, you will not notice any benefit to nitrox. And any benefit you do notice will be all placebo effect only. So I didn't put you guys in nitrox. If we were diving Ryrie, I'd consider it. But since we're not, I just felt why waste the nitrox? If there's going to be zero benefit and zero noticeability factor for it, why waste the nitrox?
Okay.
So I just made a judgment call on that to save the shop a little money. There's no dive requirement for nitrox for the nitrox certification. It's something we usually do as a courtesy to throw people in nitrox for the placebo effect. But if you do take a deep dive class with me, I will put you in nitrox for that class. I always put my students in nitrox for deep dive. It increases your safety and increases my peace of mind. So both those things are worth everything to me. So absolutely. But yeah, that's what I've got for you. If you have questions, if you need any of those math formulas, I'm happy to send those over to you. It's not a big deal. I want to make sure you have everything you need. Any questions? If you guys need, yes, sir.
Do we need cash tomorrow for the entrance?
Yeah, you can either Venmo me or just bring cash. I will be paying the entrance fee, and then if you'll just give that money to Nikki or myself, preferably Nikki, because honestly, I will be in swim trunks and I will have no place to put it. So just make sure it's $25 per day. Just pay Nikki and she'll get it, and I'm paying it with either Venmo or a check. I haven't decided yet.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll just Venmo you then.
Perfect, easy enough. Perfect. Any other questions? James, did you already pay Ashley for entrance into the place as well tomorrow?
I don't know. I'm fully settled with her, so I'm not sure what entitled.
Perfect. Did you pay for the entrance to Belmont for tomorrow?
I doubt it.
Okay. I will text her and find out who has who.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just for the actual classes is what we're
Okay. For All right. I texted her. We're good to go on that. Just $50 for the 2 days for both you guys tomorrow. So not a big deal. I'll make sure that you haven't paid for that. I doubt it. She doesn't generally collect the money for that. I generally have to pay for that. So not a big deal. We're good to go. Any more questions?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Easy enough. I'm stopping the recording now.